It's like your day off, but since we kind of ran out of time to go over this chapter in class, I appreciate you taking the time to review it here. Of course, it'll be a different dynamic without the conversations, and I'll try and keep it brief because I know that your time is valuable, but yeah, I'll try and be as brief as I can about what you need to know for the test and yeah, just some of the importance of these works of art. All right, so chapter 20. This is our one non-Western chapter, if you will. For this chapter, the focus is on what the objects are used for and who made them, as in which culture made them. I'm a big believer in acknowledging the specific culture that produced the artifacts instead of knowing them as simply African, for example, or South American. Yeah, so let's go ahead and jump right in with works of art from sub-Saharan Africa. If you visit a museum that features a collection of African art, chances are it features cultures from this portion of the continent, the sort of sub-Saharan Western Africa, because they basically had more contact with Western cultures than did this side. The first culture we're going to look at is the Benin culture, which is in modern-day Nigeria, and this work of art comes from there. So again, what you need to know is the culture that produced it. That would be the Benin. And I also want you to know, again, like what it is and what it's used for. So what we're looking at here is the head of an oba, O-B-A. Oba is the Benin word for king. And basically everything that you see here relates in some way to the position of authority that the king had. Importantly, it's not meant to be a portrait of the king. It's not supposed to look like him. It's just supposed to convey the king, the Oba's authority. So for one thing, the material is made of bronze, which is a very, rather expensive material, very hard to come by. It is a hollow cast bronze sculpture, meaning it was made using, of course, the lost wax technique. These are pictures I took whenever I saw the piece at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They're a little blown out, but hopefully you can see things like the intricate cap that he wears. That is meant to represent coral beads. And as you may know, coral comes from the ocean. So the coral beads are on his head, here in front of and behind his ears, and also the thick necklace of coils that he wears all connote to coral. And the thing about the ocean is, in the Benin culture, they feel about the ocean the way that we might feel about the sky, as in, it's the land of the spirits, it's the land of the dead, it's the land where deities live. So by wearing a crown of coral beads, this work of art connects the Oba to the concept of the afterlife and the gods. You also may have noticed that it's hollow on the inside and it kind of has this receptacle. So here's what where this sculpture originally would have been placed, on top of an altar. And as you can see, these Benin heads, these heads of obas, all have these tusks, elephant tusks, coming out of the top of them, very beautifully and richly carved. This was in the same display case as the Benin head that's featured in your textbook. Elephants are also a symbol of kingship. They're large, they're powerful, they're charismatic, they have strong tusks. So everything about this work of art relates to the king and his authority. This photograph shows a rather late Oba altar. The piece that your book features is fairly early. The Benin culture is actually able to trace their kingship all the way back to even before this, back to the 14th century. But it's a very classic work of Benin art. Right. Next up in the Benin culture, same culture, almost the same idea, but different purpose. This work of art is similar to the previous one in that it is still, a head, it's still a face. The material, as you can see, is ivory. And that, of course, is the material that's also associated with authority and kingship, as are the coral beads. What's different here is, well, for one thing, of course, it's not a full head statue, but instead, well, your book classifies it as a mask. That's a bit of a misnomer. Not sure if you can hear the sound in this. But as you can see, it's not a mask in the traditional sense because it doesn't have eye holes. This is not meant to be worn on the face. This is actually meant to be worn on the waist or chest. It has these ties above and below the ears. Another thing that's different between this work of Benin art and these is that this all honors an oba, whereas this honors an Ioba, that is a queen, the queen mother. In this case, we actually know the woman's name. This was a very important queen in the Benin Kingdom. Her name was Idia, Idia, and she's still a recognized figure in Nigeria. I've had students who hail from Nigeria, and yeah, they recognize this work of art. They've seen her face before. It's kind of like their Statue of Liberty in a way. As a matter of fact, there were several memorial works of art in honor of the Ioba Idia, but unfortunately, all these works of art are no longer in Nigeria. They've all been taken out and are in museums in New York, London, and Germany. This one is interesting because you can see it still has the coral beads around her head. What you can also see, especially in these two works of art, are a curious assortment of carvings along the top. So what that is, it's a little hard to designate. A lot of people say it looks like an elephant. But actually, this is a creature called a mudfish or a mud skipper. And these are meant to represent Portuguese men. They wear helmets, they have smooth hair, they have mustaches. And yeah, the Portuguese are included in this royal portrait because actually the Benin enjoyed a fairly close and respectful working relationship with Portugal and made a number of works of art for Portuguese collectors. This, again, was intended for a Benin audience, whereas these are more of a European one. But you can see that these do feature European Portuguese men. The mudfish, though, are a bit more interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen a mudfish before, but they're pretty gnarly little creatures. I would play this video, but I'm worried I might get flagged by YouTube for some sort of copyright, but you can look them up. They're these weird, gnarly goblin salamander things. And they're seen as symbols of the Oba, of royalty, because mudfish they're fish, they live in water, but they can also survive on land. And because the ocean is kind of the dwelling place of the gods, mud skippers are held in kind of a sacred light. In this work of art, you can also see the Oba holding a pair of jaguars by the tail. Jaguars are also a symbol of the Oba, or excuse me, leopard, not jaguar. Yeah, but it's kind of unusual. Yeah, I mean, I get why a king would want to be seen like a leopard. Leopards are fierce and cool and sexy, but yeah, mudfish are kind of a bit more taken used to. I'm digging a little bit deeper into this culture than I normally would for a makeup lecture, but I wanted to give you information on it because here in Savannah, the Savannah African Art Museum does feature a number of works of art from the Benin Kingdom. And so, yeah, it's kind of cool to have that background information before you visit. Let me see, making sure everything's still recording. Yes, so far so good. Thank you for your time. All right, boom. Let's look at this guy. Okay, so in terms of Shutri Grix, what's on the test? I want you to know what culture made it. It was made by the Yambe. And I want you to know, again, what it is, what it's used for. So what we're looking at here is about a 3-foot tall sculpture. It's made of wood. He has his hands on his hips. His feet are apart. And as you can see, this is a work of art that features a figure just completely covered in nails. For a long time, these were seen as like voodoo dolls, but that's actually not correct. What we're looking at here is a Nikisi Nkondi figure. And that can be translated to power figure. A power figure contains the power of some sort of supernatural force. In this case, the force of mangaka, which basically translates to justice. So this work of art personifies the force of justice, fair dealing, jurisprudence, legal matters. So that's why he's kind of spooky looking. He looks authoritative. He wears a cap designating his authority. He's kind of aggressive. His mouth is open. He looks us straight in the eyes with these big white eyes. And that's in order so that we can take our oath seriously. Now, the nails are interesting. These nails, they represent oaths. Those are the promises that people would make. So if we're talking about a promise between two parties, like some sort of legal dispute, or if the chief was giving a decree to the people, some sort of legal settlement was made, the two parties would drive a nail into the sculpture. And this is a way of sort of sending your promise right into the heart of justice, as it were. Yeah. Now, I couldn't find a lot of images of that specific mangaka figure. This is a mangaka figure that I found at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So same culture, same time period, different statue. And this way you can see a bit more of the details in it. It's kind of interesting looking, isn't he? Now, you may have noticed the cavities on the inside of these sculptures there in the stomach. So the idea is that originally those cavities were filled with a substance called bilongo, Bilongo. Bilongo is like a sacred material, like a sacred medicine. It's a ball of earth and clay, especially earth from ancestral grave sites. There would also be other medicinal items like feathers and birds' beaks and sacred herbs. You would make this medicinal poultice, and it would be stuffed into the stomach and also packed around the face. So you can see that the sculpture has a series of nails in its face. Those aren't the promises nails. Originally, around its face, it would have had kind of like a beard of that sacred material. And the purpose of the bilongo, the sacred material, was to activate the sculpture, was to bring the forces of justice to it, to make it come alive, as it were, to really draw the force of justice to it. Except now it's empty. And that's also significant because whenever these statues were removed from the Congo, the bilongo would also be removed. And in this way, the sculpture becomes deactivated, desacralized. It used to be a power figure that absorbed the powers of justice and kept people to their promises. But now, well, it's just a statue sitting in a museum. And so having that bilongo is no longer seen as appropriate. So it's actually kind of rare to find sculptures with the bilongo intact. This is an example of one. Yeah, so it's a pretty cool looking figure. And if you're interested in these Nikisi Nkondi figures, may I recommend heading to the Savannah African Art Museum. Oops, actually that address is incorrect. But they do have a number of Nikisinokondi figures. They don't necessarily represent justice, mangaka, but they do have the same sort of idea of holding a sacred force that you call upon by driving a nail into it. Some of these are much later examples of Nikisinokondi figures made in like the 1950s to the 1970s, but they are all still authentic, made in the Democratic Republic of the Congo by members of the Yombe culture. Yeah. So that is the meaning of this work of art. And lastly, for arts of Africa, we could do a whole section on African textiles. My favorite has to be Kente cloth. So what you need to know is what the object is. It's called Kente, and I want you to know the culture. In this case, you can just know Ghana, because it has become synonymous with Ghana. It does originate in the Asante culture, but you don't need to know that for the test. So the deal with Kente cloth is that it's a little hard to see in my photograph, I apologize, but it's not like one big woven blanket. Kente cloth is woven in strips. Each one of these strips is about 5 inches wide, and you sew them together on the long edges to make a full blanket. Depending on how high status you are, that designates how wide your kente would be. But the thing is, you wouldn't just wear this just for the sake of looking cool. Every single kente cloth has a meaning, like a proverb attached to it. This particular cloth is called Mumida, and that can translate to something unprecedented, something that has never happened. And this particular bit of cloth was worn by this person, Kwame Nkrumah. He was the first president of Ghana. He led the country to independence in the 1950s. He was actually seen as a very influential figure for the American Civil Rights Movement. But he was very involved in Asante culture and wore kente on special occasions. He wore this cloth whenever he was freed from jail. He had opposed colonialism. He was put in jail, but he was freed, and this has never happened before. So he always wore a cloth that corresponded with certain events. Kente cloth, here, take a look at this. There's a specific way to wear it. How do I get rid of this? There we go. Well, I don't know if you can see this or not. You're just looking at my big, stupid face. Hi. It has to be worn over the left shoulder. Apparently, you look quite foolish if you wear it otherwise. You bring the cloth over your left shoulder. Bring the right-hand side over to match. And then roll the cloth, kind of fan fold it so that the outside edge now hangs over your shoulder, and it must be even all the way around. That's quite important. Right. The Savannah African Art Museum does also feature a collection of kente. They kind of have oversimplified the meaning. They just talk about colors meaning certain things, but actually it's the colors and the pattern and the weave and the width all signify certain proverbs. So it's a very specific type of cloth worn on specific occasions. It's not something you just wear for the heck of it. But these days it has become kind of synonymous with just basically African textiles. It's been used in a lot of African American communities. There are certain sororities that wear kente as graduation stoles. And I also noticed this past year, past few years, kente being used as a sign of political protest, which I thought was kind of interesting. Let's see. Oh gosh, I'm babbling on a little bit. Oh, I hope this is still recording. Yes, okay. All right, sorry about all this. Okay, next up. All right, so Oceanic Cultures. The first culture I want to talk about comes here in the Solomon Islands. And normally I would make you guys memorize the exact name of the culture, the tribe that produced this work of art. But in this case, yeah, you don't really need to know that because I couldn't find it. And normally I just skip it, but I can't help it. This work of art is just so rad. I wanted to talk about it. What we're looking at here is this great charismatic caricature face of this man holding a little bird in the tips of his fingers. What I want you to know is what this was used for. This was originally placed on the prow of a canoe. So these figures, these prow figures, are called this in the native language, Toto Isu or Nuzu Nuzu, which I may not be pronouncing right. You can see that they all have these fantastic, exaggerated facial features, gauged ears, and kind of shining eyes and shining tattoos. The eyes and the tattoos are inlaid mother of pearl, which is the interior of a shell. You know how shells like flash when they catch the light? That's what the eyes are made out of. And as you can see, it's a figure of protection. So these figures with their flashing, bright, wide eyes are keeping watch. They're placed on the front of the canoe to make sure that the people in the canoe are safe, that the ship won't overturn or become submerged or run into a rock or something. Some of them hold their hands in front of their face. There are also prow figures that hold severed heads. This particular one holds a bird which looks down, making sure they don't run into anything aground. And birds are significant to this particular culture here on the Solomon Islands because they're sort of like intermediaries between the spirit world of the sky and the earthly world on the ground. They sort of transcend both places. Yeah, so I guess I don't have a lot of information on the name of the culture, but the fact that this is just a protective figure and he's got these cool gauges in his ears, he's just so cool looking. I wanted to talk about him for a bit. Let's see. However, I do know the name of this culture, the Maori culture. The Maori culture, this is the native population, the indigenous peoples of New Zealand. And I've noticed that Maori culture has become a bit more of like a feature in pop culture these days. People are familiar with a lot of Maori practices and Maori tattooing, for example. What we're looking at here is a marae, M-A-R-A-E. And as you can see, a marae is a meeting house. This is kind of like the center of the community. This is where the community would gather together to hear important issues or to talk about important topics. This is where boys become men, where women formally enter into the community. And the thing about a marae is that it represents the entire community and its ancestors. As you can see, the posts in the house are all covered with human figures and faces. It's meant to represent the presence of your ancestors, their face, their shoulders, their arms and legs. Traditionally, a marae would represent the presence of just the one ancestor. This particular marae is interesting. This is the Waitangi marae, and this is meant to represent all of the Maori villages and communities, and was built in celebration of the signing of the Waitangi Treaty. So it's kind of used as sort of like an education center for Maori culture and Maori practices. Here you can see some close-ups of the house posts. That they're great, menacing faces and flashing eyes. And also some indication of some intricate tattoos, which kind of brings me to a possible homework assignment. I'll let you read about the assignment on your own time, but for this homework project, it involves researching the Maori art of moko, which is traditional tattoos. And I want you to design a moko and explain which symbols you chose, what they mean, and what they mean as a whole when they're all put together. Maori tattoos are meant to be very significant and autobiographical. This is also a project that affords you some extra credit if you take the time to actually draw it on your skin, as well as explain its meaning. I'll give you some extra credit. But you can also get full credit by simply drawing it on these coloring book pages that I've provided. But yeah, read about it on your own time if you wish. As we quickly shift over to native North and South American cultures. Of course, for North American, you are probably already familiar with all of the numerous tribes and Native American cultures there are. The one that I am focusing on is the Adena culture. Now, the Adena culture eventually was assimilated and is part of the greater Hopewell Nation. Again, if you're familiar with Native American cultures, you may have heard of the Hopewell before. This is kind of their earlier ancestors. So yes, I want you to know it is made by the Adena culture. I want you to know what it is. It's the Great Serpent Mound, which is just simply a mound of earth. How it was made is no big mystery. It's just a pile of rocks and earth all packed together in this shape. And it's called the Serpent Mound because, well, looks like that. Looks a bit like a snake, maybe eating something, maybe swallowing an egg. This is one of those cases where, again, how it was made is no mystery. The question is why it was made. What is its significance? And as you can see, this is a very old work of art. It's from the 11th century. And unfortunately, since the Adena culture basically passed away, why it was made is a matter of some interpretation. The Hopewell culture, they use snakes in their iconography as a symbol of fertility and growth and crops. And it could be that the same tradition originated here with the serpent mound. Yeah. That's one theory, at least. And whenever it comes to some works of art, especially old ones like this, when it comes to other theories, they tend to get very colorful. So these won't be on the test, but just for the sake of, I don't know, really looking at this, let's look at some other theories. Maybe it represents the Little Dipper, and maybe the tail curls around the North Star. That's a possibility. One theory I like is that it was made to celebrate the appearance of Halley's Comet, which in 1066 would have been a very close pass to the Earth. It would have been this big, bright phenomenon in the sky. And I like that theory. It kind of led me on a fun little rabbit trail of other appearances of Halley's Comet in art. It appears in medieval works of art, especially. In this case, kind of interestingly, this is the Bayeux tapestry. And the Normans saw Halley's Comet as a favorable omen to their conquest of England. That's an interesting one. But my favorite stupid theory was written by a pastor who thought, okay, snake holding something. Maybe it's an apple, snakes, apples. I found the Garden of Eden. So if you've ever wanted to know where the Garden of Eden was in the book of Genesis, it's here, the Great Serpent Mound outside of Cincinnati. It may sound a little fishy, but hey, he found a verse that backs up his theory. Job 16:13. Ooh, maybe it's about this. That led me on another fun little rabbit trail of people who have tried to find the original Garden of Eden and the knowledge of good and evil in the tree. But that's a different story for a different day. Let's honor your time and wrap things up a bit. Just two more works of art. And I will spare you from talking about the greater iconography and the shared traditions of Central and South American cultures. This will not be on the test, nor will this. But this is just to kind of show the shared cultures of Central and South America, these city states with the pyramids in the center, and how after one city would fall, another one would take its place. To kind of ground you, this is the work of art that's on the test. And it comes from Yaxchilan, which is just southwest of the famous pyramid of Tikal. It's between Mexico and Guatemala. And Yaxchilan is the home of some ruins from which they have extracted these three-dimensional relief carvings. Okay, so blah, 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 blah. What do I need to know for the test? You need to know that it is Mayan. This is the Mayan civilization. And I want you to know what the heck is going on here. And it's awesome. You can't see it, but I'm grinning because this work of art is just way too cool. This is lintel 24. A lintel is the top part of a doorway, like the post and lintel system. These are the lintels. And they have these decorative three-dimensional carvings. So lintel 24 is called that just because that's the 24th lintel that they found. So here's the lintel, the carving, and here is an illustration showing what's going on. And it's a little hard to read the images, but we can read the hieroglyphics. And the hieroglyphics is this very complicated system of writing that tell us what's happening here. This is Lord Shield Jaguar. He's a Mayan king, and he's holding a spear, a flaming spear, over his wife's head. And his wife is performing a bloodletting ceremony. She has pierced her tongue with a stingray barb, and you can see that she's got her tongue out, and she's pulling a rope through it. The rope has these thorns sticking out of it. So she's pulling this rope through her tongue. Ugh, it's so brutal to think about. And there's blood curling on her face. This must have been an absolutely brutal, painful thing to go through, but she's doing it in order to show her dedication and her how religious she is, how holy she is. So she's performing this ceremony, and at her feet is a basin that has paper in it. And she's going to use that paper to clean off her face, clean off that blood, and then she is going to light it on fire along with some sacred herbs, wink, wink. And she's going to sit in an enclosed space with those herbs, inhale them, and basically she's getting high. She's smoking these herbs, and she's beholding a vision of some snake coming curling out of the basin, and the snake's mouth opens, and an ancestor pokes his head out to talk to her. Isn't that absolutely buck wild? I love the Mayan civilization. It's so cool and so bizarre and so complicated. They're just like, it's so awesome. But yeah. You can look it up more on your own time. And I would talk more about the awesome, cool Mayans and also the awesome, cool Aztecs who came afterwards. But let's just move ahead to our next and final culture. The Nazca. The Nazca are they're a culture in modern day Peru, and they're famous for the Nazca lines. It's these lines in the desert that, when seen from an aerial perspective, form shapes. So this is the shape of a hummingbird. Now, I know that it looks very green and verdant on this screen, but here, I wanted to show you some Google Maps views that show us that actually it's not quite this way in real life. So this is the Nazca Valley. As you can see, it's completely barren. And through the Nazca Valley, there are these lines. these pathways in the desert. We've always known that they existed, but it wasn't until people began to fly over them in airplanes that we realized that they form intricate shapes. Let's see, I think this is the one. Yeah. So right there, you can see the figure of a monkey. And there's a whole plethora of different shapes as well. So again, this is what the Nazca lines look like from the ground. From the air, they look a bit like this. We can see a spider, the monkey. This one is known as the tree. This is the condor, very famous one. This one, a lot of students said kind of looks like a chicken, but actually those are known as the hands. Just recently, they found this one, a cat. And lastly, this one here on the side of a hill has been the subject of much speculation. It looks a bit like that. And he's been dubbed the astronaut. Because we all know who really built these, right? All right, so this is one of the cases where how the pathways were made is no mystery. All that is done here is just clearing the dark topsoil out of the way and showcasing the lighter limestone underneath. Again, we've always known that they existed. The question is why? All over this valley, there are just hundreds of lines and dozens of these shapes. Why? So, let's look at some of the theories. And in case you're secretly thinking to yourself, is this going to be on the test? Yes, this will. Actually, to be frank, this is a bonus question. So I'll know who gets it right, who's been watching this video to see if you got this right. Okay, so goofy theory about the Nazca lines number 1. Well, that astronaut gives it away. This was built by aliens. Of course. These are signs sent from our extraterrestrial friends, and these are landing strips, you see, for the extraterrestrial spacecraft. So the UFOs, I guess, would come landing on this landing strip. I guess so. They also point to these strange misshapen skulls as evidence of some sort of supernatural presence, but those are actually just human skulls. All right, so theory number 1, aliens. Theory number 2, it might have something to do with constellations, that maybe these are, like, say, the Cygnus, the swan. And it's possible that these lines in the desert correspond with certain celestial patterns, kind of the way that we think about Stonehenge now as being like a calendar. Maybe this is an elaborate calendar system. Possible. Maybe they were meant to be seen on hot air balloon rides. And this theory sounds a little fishy, but actually one of the Nazca line shapes does somewhat resemble a hot air balloon. And in 1975, a couple of scientists wanted to see if it was possible. It's floating with the aid of natural gas. And they were able to build a hot air balloon and fly this sucker for about 40 minutes before it started to leak. I guess it's possible. Maybe these were meant to be seen from balloons. The theory, though, that people accept now is that the long pathways were meant to be walked by people, and that the animal shapes that we see are meant to be symbols that the dead would see. So the idea is that this whole valley is like the land where the spirits live, the land where your ancestors live. And by looking down and seeing these shapes, you're communicating to your ancestors that you're here and that you're honoring them. And so if, like, your family symbol was the monkey, you would be walking along this pathway, and you would know that whenever you got to this intersection and this intersection, that you're at the shape that looks like a monkey, and you could leave offerings there or offer prayers to your ancestors, again, as kind of a way to guide them in this valley, which I think is probably the correct one. But again, we all know that it was really aliens. But yeah, that's it for chapter 20. Looks like I was able to wrap that up in less than 40 minutes. So thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for your time. Yeah, and if you have any questions about anything at all, just review your study guide or send me an email. I'll see you later.